Hey guys, Sam here at NA Studios. Today we're taking a look at how to compress vocals. Now, if you clicked on this video, it means you want to learn how to process your vocals to get the best out of them. I've already made a video on how you can EQ your vocals, which you can check out in the description. If you're interested in processing vocals and how you can get the best sound possible, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know every time I upload a new video in this series. So when we're dealing with vocal compression, this is about the dynamics of the track. This is about getting each word to be heard and about getting each word to sit in the mix. I'm going to take a listen to this track now, and this is not compressed. This is completely dry, and you're going to hear a few issues with this vocal. Let's check it out.
So much confusion and so much left to say. I never wanted for it to end this way. Oh.
Okay, so some words can be heard. Overall, it's kind of at a good level, but there are some words that really do poke out of the mix, some words that kind of tuck in a little bit, and we don't want that. We want a nice consistent level throughout. So let's take a look at our compressor and how we can manipulate the controls within that compressor to get the sound that we want. Now, the compressor that I've chosen here is from iZotope Neutron 4. It's not for any reason other than it has a really good display of how much it's compressing, what it's taking away from the original signal, and what your overall level of compression is like. It's kind of handy. So if we take a look at the controls of our compressor, we're going to go in depth in these. But first off, let's just have a brief overview of what each control is going to do. So the threshold is the point at which it starts compressing. So anything above that point of threshold is going to be compressed. Anything louder than where you set the threshold is going to be compressed, in a nutshell. The ratio you can think of as how much compression. Attack is how fast it's going to compress or how fast it's going to reach full compression. And release is the opposite, how long it takes to release to no compression after compression has taken place. Okay, so a few things that we need to address there. First off, I think let's just take a listen to the uncompressed version and then the compressed version next to each other and discuss how they vary and how we can alter that sound using these controls.
I never wanted for.
So clearly when that compression is in place, it's bringing down those peaks a touch. And how much those peaks are brought down is governed by the controls. So we've got attack, release, and we've got threshold and ratio. Let's actually talk about attack a little bit first, because if you don't get your attack right, then those threshold and ratio controls are not going to be as effective. So attack is super important. At the moment, we've got our attack on 20 milliseconds. This means it's going to take 20 milliseconds to achieve full compression. It doesn't mean that it takes 20 milliseconds to start compressing. It doesn't ignore the signal for 20 milliseconds and then after that point say, right, let's start compressing. It's just that that's the ramp. That's how long it takes to achieve the full compression that you've set based on the threshold and the ratio. So let's put that into practice then. Let's have a really long attack time and then a really short attack time and see how that changes the sound and the amount of compression that's applied. So first of all, let's go for a really quick attack. So this is 0.1 of a millisecond. This is basically no attack time at all, more or less instant.
I never wanted for.
Okay, so we can see on this trace here that it comes down. It's this slope that we're looking at here. It comes down pretty quickly and it clamps down on that transient. So if we do the opposite of that and bring this attack all the way up, then we're not going to see anywhere near that kind of gradient. It's going to be far, far shallower and take basically ages to actually start compressing. Let's listen to it.
I never wanted for.
So it's this section here again. You can see the compression, the ramp there is far, far longer. It takes absolutely ages to start compressing, and it's actually far too long because you can see it actually achieves that full compression here after the transient has taken place. So this is far too long. And this kind of scope, this kind of visual aid that you have in Neutron is super useful for this kind of stuff, because especially when you're just starting out, especially beginner kind of stuff, it's very difficult to kind of say, well, 500 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds. Well, what actually is that? You couldn't really visualize that. You can't really click your fingers twice, 200 milliseconds apart. It's quite difficult. So this gives you a visual aid, which I find extremely helpful. So let's go for somewhere in the middle of those two then. Let's go for maybe 100 milliseconds and just see how fast this slope comes down, what the gradient of this slope is.
I never wanted for.
Okay, so you can see that it achieves full compression here. And this is kind of on the second of the two transients, the first one being here, the second one being here. So at 100 milliseconds, we're allowing that initial transient to come through. And then overall, it's just gently, a bit more gradually kind of compressing the overall sound. If we had that at really fast again, just remember this gradient, remember the kind of relatively gentle slope, and then have a look when it's really fast.
I never wanted for.
It's come straight down on that initial transient. It's not leaving the same amount of time as it was before. It's clamping down straight away. So this kind of really fast attack, useful for some stuff, not as useful for others. If you really want to clamp down on the transients, if you want there to be very little dynamic range there at all, if you really want to slam those peaks, then a fast attack time is going to be your friend. But if you're just trying to gently kind of gradually level the whole thing, then something longer is going to be appropriate. Typically, I will have the vocal attack time somewhere in the 20 to 100 millisecond range. I know that those are kind of my low and high points that I generally try and keep inside of. So let's do that now. Let's try and get something that's kind of appropriate. It's appropriate for our ears, and we can see visually that it's clamping down on the right transients at the right time.
I never wanted for.
So that's kind of killing it still.
I never wanted for.
It's nicer.
I never wanted for.
Go a bit longer.
I never wanted for.
Okay, that's nice. So it's at 86 milliseconds. That to me allowed the transient to kind of be recognized and come through a touch, but still be tamed. So if we take a listen to that now with and without the compression, you're going to hear that that's really reining that in quite a lot.
I never wanted for. I never wanted for.
So there's a pretty big difference there between the uncompressed and the compressed version, and 86 milliseconds seems to be working here. Let's take a look at the release time now, because the release time is kind of like the opposite of the attack. It's how long it takes for the compression to release afterwards, how long it takes to go back to no compression. And in a vocal, especially in a vocal that's quite dynamic and often when it's quite softly spoken, it's very important. So at the moment, we've got the release at 100 milliseconds. Let's just take a listen to the ends of some of these phrases.
I never wanted for.
So just at the end of that word for, I never wanted for. We're thinking about how long it's still clamping down on that transient or that piece of audio after it's breached the threshold. So let's just play around with this release time and see if we can get it sounding a bit more natural. We're going to go for a really long release, so it's going to keep compressing, and then we're going to go for a really short release and listen to the differences. So let's take this release up to 1 second and just hear how this sounds.
I never wanted for.
So hear this slope that's coming back. It's taking a long time to go back up to 0 for no compression. Let's take a look if it was a really fast release. So let's go, I don't know, 20 milliseconds.
I never wanted for.
It comes straight back up. So this is to do with the overall level of the vocal. A compressor, yes, it brings down the loud parts, but overall, we're aiming to make those loud parts and those quiet parts a bit more uniform and to get them so that they're in the same kind of area. So if we're just bringing the loud parts down, that's fine, but then we still want to be able to hear those quiet parts. We're not bringing them back up again. So essentially, there's two parts to a compressor. There's the part that's bringing the signal down, and then there's the part that's bringing that stuff back up again. And you can see that's going to be this makeup gain over here. I've got auto turned off On a lot of compressors, they will automatically bring that gain back up again. But we're really concerned here with how fast the compressor is stopping compressing. And we want to hear every single word. So we want to make sure we can hear the tails of all those words. So with the release really long, we were still compressing the ends of those words. Just take a listen again.
I never wanted for.
So it takes a while for that to come back up again. But when it's faster,
I never wanted for.
The second syllable of that word for or, on the or bit, it's coming back up again at a good rate. It's not compressing that as well. So that's what your release is all about. It's about how fast it comes back after it's compressed. And if you've got it too long, then it's going to be compressing bits of the signal that you don't want it to compress. You just want it to compress those loud parts. If your release is too long, it's going to keep compressing the quieter parts as well, which we don't want. So we need to tune that so that we're making the quieter parts as loud as they need to be, and we're not compressing them as well. So let's just tailor that a little bit.
I never wanted for.
That sounds good.
I never wanted for.
Nice.
I never wanted for.
Okay, somewhere around there, 88 milliseconds. That sounds good to me. And we can see on the trace here that it's coming back up at a decent rate. It's not a really long, gradual release. It's fairly quick, but it's not doing it absolutely automatically, because that can lead to kind of a jolty vocal performance. So now we've got our head around the attack and release. Let's go on to the more universal parts of the compressor, and this is the threshold and ratio. A lot of people start with these, but in the case of the threshold, it's relatively self-explanatory. The ratio takes a little bit of getting your head around it, but the attack and release are super important, so they're worth looking at first. Let's look at the threshold then. So the threshold is the point at which compression starts to take place. Here it is minus 14.7 dB. If I bring the threshold all the way up to 0 and play the track,
I never wanted for.
We're not achieving any compression at all, because none of the peaks are reaching that 0 dB point, and if nothing is reaching the threshold, nothing is going to be compressed. Similarly, if I bring this down really far, down to minus 30,
I never wanted for.
It's just compressing absolutely everything. So you need it somewhere in the middle. You just want to be compressing the parts that are too loud. So if we have a listen to this again, let's just listen to which words are too loud in this performance.
I never wanted for.
So the majority of it is a bit too loud. The end of the word wanted, that's kind of all right. So we don't necessarily want to compress that part. And that's this section here. It's okay if we just tickle it a little bit, but we don't want to be really clamping down. So let's bring our threshold down to around about where it was before. So we're just coming down on these transients here and not affecting this tid, the one tid, too much. Let's hear it again.
I never wanted for.
Cool. And because we've got our release relatively fast, it's not going to be still compressing on that word tid, or that part of the word tid. So that's going to be coming through the compressor. Let's just experiment with how it sounds if you bring that threshold down a bit more, not to extreme settings like we had a moment ago, but just a little bit lower. Let's go for minus 25.
I never wanted for.
It's still too much, isn't it? Let's bring it up to minus 20.
I never wanted for.
Okay, we could get away with minus 20. It's still compressing quite a lot though. And this is where the ratio comes into play. So the ratio is one number to another number. In this instance, we've got it as 4 to 1. What that means is that every 4 decibels that passes the threshold, it's only going to output 1 dB, which sounds kind of weird. But if you think of it in terms of this, if our threshold is at minus 20 and we have a signal that comes in at minus 16, so 4 dB above the threshold, then it's only going to output that signal to minus 19, which is 1 dB above the threshold, above that minus 20. It's weird because you're thinking of it in terms of negative numbers, and passing the threshold actually turns out to be a smaller number, but because it's a negative number, it's actually a bigger number. Let's put this into practice and see exactly how this is actually going to affect the audio. So at the moment we're at 4 to 1, and we can see that we're getting, at points, we're getting up to kind of 12 dB of compression. If we bring this down to 2 to 1, for example, then we're not going to see anything down as low as this. Let's try that out.
I never wanted for.
So you can see nothing's coming down to here. It's only coming down to maybe -8, -7. So if we think about that in terms of the numbers, if it's compressing 10 or 12 dB, then it's only going to be letting around 3 dB through at 4 to 1. But at 2 to 1, if it's got 12 dB above the threshold, then it's going to be letting about 6 dB through, because 2 to 1, you're kind of just halving it. So you can see how lower ratios are going to be far gentler on the signal. But what about really high ratios? Well, let's go up above that 4 to 1. How high do we go here? We can go to 30. That's crazy. Let's go to, say, 8 to 1 here. So anything that breaches the threshold by 8 dB is only going to output 1 dB. So this is going to sound a lot more aggressive.
I never wanted for.
Yeah, we're getting like -16 dB of compression there. Let's take a listen to it again at 4 to 1.
I never wanted for.
Then down at 2 to 1 again, be far gentler.
I never wanted for.
It's far more gentle. Back up to 4 to 1.
I never wanted for.
Okay, so if you've got a higher ratio, then it's going to be compressing more. But you can kind of circumnavigate that by using your attack control. If you like the amount of compression that it's clamping down on your vocal by, then you can say, okay, I like the overall tone of that. I like how much it's compressing it, but those initial transients are kind of getting a bit squashed. So in that instance, we can then lengthen the attack time. So let's take a listen to this at 4 to 1 with the threshold down at 20, and it sounds a little compressed to my ear.
I never wanted for.
Especially on that wanted. So let's bring the attack up slightly. Let's go to 150, for example.
I never wanted for.
It's being a little bit gentler on it. Bring it up to 200.
I never wanted for.
Yeah, it's being a lot gentler now. So you can see how these controls are all very much interlinked. There's not only one way of reducing the amount of compression you're applying to a signal, and there's not only one way of making it so you're compressing more. If you were to make the attack faster, you'll be compressing more. In the same way as if you reduce the threshold, you'd be compressing more. If you brought the ratio up, you'd be compressing more. There's loads of different ways of doing it. I've done some bounces here just so we can see exactly what the compression is doing to the waveform. So this one on the top is the original. We can see that this is a fairly gentle section, these three, and then we've got the loud bit here. This first waveform is with the attack on 200, the release on around 90, threshold of around -20, and the ratio of around 4 to 1. Look at what it's doing to these sections here. This is a massive peak here, then here it's really gentle. This section is still staying quite loud though, because it's being allowed through that attack time. The attack time is not fast enough to stop that transient. Then the next one, everything stayed exactly the same with the ratio and the threshold and release, but the attack is faster. It's now 20 milliseconds. Look how much faster it's clamped down on that transient, and it's not let it through as much as this one. On the next one, we've got the attack back up at 200 milliseconds. We've got the release the exact same and the threshold the exact same, but we're on an 8 to 1 ratio. So you can see how the waveform from this one with a 4 to 1 ratio and this one with an 8 to 1 ratio, visually they're not actually changed that much. You're not clamping down too much on the transients anymore in one or the other, because the attack time is the same. You're still allowing that attack to let the transient through. Then on the next one, we've got the attack back to 20 milliseconds, so quite fast again. The release on 90, threshold the same, and the ratio the same there as 8 to 1. You can see how just having that attack time has really clamped down on the transient. You can see how this one and this one are far more similar because they've got the same attack time. Different ratio, but same attack time. So they're far more similar. And then finally, this one is absolutely slammed. The attack is non-existent. It's just as fast as it will go. And then the release is 90 and the threshold is actually at -40. And then the ratio is at 8. And it's just turned it into a sausage. So it's just completely annihilated it and got rid of all the transient information there completely. So I hope that's been useful for you in getting to know how you can compress a vocal, what all the different controls are going to do, and Perhaps a lot of people focus on predominantly the ratio and threshold when they're looking at compression, but I feel that it's far more about that attack time. It's far more about how much you are letting through and how much the compressor is allowing to get through before it reaches that full compression. And that is so important. If there's another element of vocal processing that you want to see, then please leave it in the comments below. If you want to know about bussing, vocal processing, de-essing, whatever it is, I want to hear about it. Leave it down below and I'll see what I can do. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Take care.